Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reacher podcast. For those who aren't familiar, what we do is we interview the top voices in social commerce, e-commerce, founders and execs here. I'm the head of go-to-market at Reacher. Reacher is an end-to-end creator matchmaking software that helps automate outreach, nurture relationships, gamify your creator relationships, and leverages AI so you don't have to scale your headcount while you grow your company. Today I've got Kyle here. When I met Kyle at the Malibu office of one of our biggest partners, Advertise Purple, I was just like absolutely, head over heels, I guess, with the advice you're giving me on scaling a sales team, building companies, all the companies you founded. And it was just an absolute pleasure. So after we talked first day, I was like, Kyle, I want to get you on our podcast. So for those who aren't familiar, Kyle, do you want to do a quick intro on your background and some of the things you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me in.
Of course.
Yeah, so I, as Sohun mentioned, founded Advertise Purple, which is an affiliate management agency, back in 2012. That was my kind of second company. And before that, there was a SaaS product that was kind of video-centric. But Advertise Purple, we scaled over a period of, about a decade plus to upwards of 175 plus employees.
Wow.
And so I was the CEO during that time up until about 2023, at which point I kind of stepped up to the board and began a new project. But yeah, so I'm excited to be here, excited to hopefully provide some valuable nuggets for you.
Yeah. I mean, Kyle, you're very humble. I mean, you've started multiple companies. And like, even when I was interviewing John, CEO of Advertise Purple, he was telling me about how you had trials and tribulations between past companies, raising equity, bootstrapping, even the name, making it simple. So, you didn't overthink it. He's like, purple is regal. Let's do Advertise Purple. Like, I know all the background there. And I think the burning question for founders right now is like, how do we get our Jonathan? Like, how do we get our early stage talent right now? I know me, like, for Reacher, right? We've 2x'd our company size. We finished our seed round. We're growing incredibly fast. And I've been on Sales Nav. I've been DMing people with certain characteristics. I've been trying to go to events and poach people from there, even walking up to people at event booths and saying like, hey, are you looking for a job? And I'll pay you a referral bonus. Like, I've been trying everything. And really what we found is with the early stage team, it's just so much work and you have to incentivize them so highly. So when you were building that founding team at Advertise Purple, what did your recruiting process look like?
Gosh, that's a great question. First of all, you can't have my Jonathan, so everybody. To be totally candid, I didn't put too much thought into it. I noticed a theme early on, which I kind of leveraged throughout the recruitment process, which was I am looking for very intellectually capable, smart problem solvers, first and foremost. Secondarily, do they have the aptitude to kind of rise to the occasion within the subject matter? And if so, can they solve, problems close to home? And so for me, it really started like that. I looked at resumes. I actually didn't do what you mentioned, which is, I think, the correct way to do it. So, in the way that I did it is, definitely probably not the only way to do it. There's many ways to skin the cat. Nevertheless, for me, kind of building the character profile of an employee, I was able to do early on, and it really worked for Advertise Purple. And that was somebody who went to a great college, somebody who had very good, excellent grades, and somebody that was like, 1 to 3 years out of school. So this is unique, I think, in my opinion. I didn't look for senior talent. So for me, I was looking for somebody who was very malleable, again, a problem solver, had a youthful energy, was enthusiastic. Those to me were the marks of somebody that could, again, rise to the occasion and really kind of transcend a lot of the barriers that come along with an early stage company. My job was to indoctrinate them with what is affiliate, what is performance marketing, how do we think about it here at Advertise Purple, how do we execute upon that? And so, that was kind of my path. And I think incentivization is a crucial question. And, equity, like we had talked about in Malibu, is something that I really keep in my back pocket.
Yep.
Again, not to get tangential, but I told you the little anecdote of my experience with a partner and with
Yep.
breaking up equity in my first company. It didn't go too well. So my whole kind of ethos with Advertise Purple was I wanted to grow organically. I really want to mold the people that we bring on. And that ended up working out well.
Let's talk about the malleability, because I agree with the enthusiasm. I think Jonathan is like this huge ball of like enthusiasm and energy, and it really works for him. Like he's enthusiastic in the sales process, he's enthusiastic with all the account managers, even with his partners like me. I'm like, you have so much enthusiasm. You respond to me very quick.
Yeah.
And he told me, he's like, I only sleep like 90 minutes a day. But he still has all this enthusiasm. I'm like, how do you do it? So I think he like perfectly fits the mark of like someone who's enthusiastic, went to USC, was giving like presentations to like the CEO of Trader Joe's. And it's just like he fits all those calibers. But I'm curious, like, why junior and why 1 to 3 years specifically? I think the obvious thing is that junior is cheaper, and you can use performance-based rather than you can use performance-based rather than, a very high base. But also, like, what about the opportunity cost of a founder's time in early stage? I think something we've grappled with at Reacher is like, for example, marketers. I think marketers are usually brought in like very junior for like B2B, unless you're going straight to bringing in someone like very senior and you're the founder, right? But if like I'm head of go-to-market and I'm bringing in someone new, they're probably going to be a social media girl who like does really, really well on, that, and she can handle our social media and curate community and events, and like performance marketing at a basic level can be automated, right? But then it's like, hey, your social media tasks, intersect with automation and performance. And now I have to create Loom videos, ClickUp tasks, deadline. And I'm just like, all those things come at the opportunity cost of spending more time with Advertise Purple or, meeting with high quality clients, going and speaking on a stage where we could go get new business and talk to TikTok. What's the trade-off there between hiring junior versus hiring senior there?
Yeah. I mean, we didn't hire senior talent until probably, 2020, 2021. So, we were a decade into Advertise Purple, and we were well within the scaled portion of Advertise Purple. But I think the trade-off is kind of like what you mentioned, right? You are going, in theory, you're going to have somebody that you can really hand the ball to and be confident that, hey, I can step out, I can completely check out, go do my initiatives, go to trade shows, meet with important people, and not have to, micromanage their work or their agenda. However, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. When we did hire senior talent, that it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. There was a lot of rewiring that went into senior talent, and I think to me that's why I loved, in a whole kind of motto of mine early on, and this was part of my kind of incentivization package, was promotion from within. So, everything for the first 5 to 10 years was we were promoting from within. We were teaching people our systems, and we were making them capable, and they were rising to the occasion. Because again, when you get some, group of people that are cut from the same cloth, that are smart, that are driven, they're going to do that. Obviously there's a percent that don't, but I think for me, I like to put trust in the hands of those new hires early. And I'm like, you're smart. I know you're smart. You've done it. You went to Berkeley, you went to SC, you went to wherever. You can figure it out. This is not that difficult. Here's what you need to do. Solve the problem. I'll be back tomorrow. And so I obviously, as you can imagine, there's a percent again that, tomorrow comes and you're like, what'd you do? It's a short road for them. But again, when you're working with less expensive talent, it's easier to get rid of them. There's not high expectations. But again, the caveat of senior level talent to your question is there is going to be a learning curve, and that is rewiring. Well, what do you know about digital? Oh, well, we don't do it like that. Oh, you worked at another affiliate management agency. We also don't deliver a service like that. So, there can be tension there, I think, that presents itself and manifests down the road in the relationship when it's more difficult to disconnect.
Interesting. And what do you mean by like tension? Like I'm inferring that like if you're bringing in a director of growth, for example, and let's say your growth is more about like driving word of mouth referrals from customers rather than being loud on social media, right? But the director of growth sees it differently. But then during the interview process, you're like, hey, you're coming in to lead this. Is that what you mean? Is like a misalignment between expectations and like impact there, or?
Yeah, I think it's like a, kind of core values or pattern of how business is conducted. There's a way that Advertise Purple scaled, and it was, really like a sales organization. I mean,
Yep.
we were one of the very few, if not the only, people in our world that had a large outbound sales team. That was the channel for customer acquisition that worked for us.
Yep.
And the further we got in down the road, we would have senior level talent that would come in and say, hey, I think we should be more selective. I think we should be more, poised with the type of brands that we're onboarding. And on paper, that sounds well and good, but our business was built in a specific way. And so I think just kind of, carrying on what had worked for them in the past into a new organization where the DNA was a bit different. It at least for us, it was harder to kind of change their perspective and really get them heavily invested in the business model for Advertise Purple, why it's working for us today and why we need to lean into it and keep going with it.
Usually people bring in senior talent to hit a new level of growth that the company hasn't been through, right? And there's usually different jobs and skill sets to get there than your previous legs, right? What if the senior talent was right? Like what if Advertise Purple did need to change the way they looked at their clients are bringing in, their ICP? I think this is a conversation I had with John a ton about TikTok Shop, you know, like, and I think every single TikTok Shop consultant and expert will say like, oh, here's your certain ICP. They need to have like some sort of following on social. They need to be talked about. There needs to be influencer roster. They need to be demonstratable on camera. But then, John has shown me the numbers where it's like, hey, we brought in a client like, Benchmark Abrasives where like they scaled a ton. And like, this isn't a product that seems to like fit on TikTok Shop, right? So I think there's like really both sides to it, right? Do you ever feel like maybe senior talent should disagree with you and should push back on the way things are run because you do need change, you need diversity and perspective?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. Did we find that senior talent? No. I think, we had the senior talent that was more vocal about here's, a different direction I think we should go. Yeah. But I can't substantiate the benefit of that outcome, or I can't give you comfort about that outcome. So I think you're right. If you do come across senior talent that has built systems unique to your company and they've seen those through to the finish line and they've, been right more times than they've been wrong. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's crucial. And to what John said and what you guys are talking about, I mean, Advertise Purple, with Content Studio and with the whole concept of managing TikTok Shop, that was something that came in at the right time for us, and we pivoted quickly. That was, senior talent led initiative. Collectively, we were working on it before I kind of stepped away. But yeah, I think you are right to be totally honest. I just don't think that we found that. But once again, the way that we recruited senior talent was pretty lackluster. We were not doing what you're doing. So I don't think we necessarily had access to the same pool, or we were investing in really going out there and finding the right person, because that is difficult and it's expensive. And if you're leveraging recruiters and agencies, it's all of a sudden, weeks turn into months and you're like, I haven't found one great candidate yet. Yeah.
I mean, Bora and Jerry, what they did for me, right, was probably expensive in terms of founder time. Like Bora would be hopping on webinars I did. He'd be like, oh, I know just your fun fact was poker. Like, I'm in the area. Let's go to this casino and play poker together, and DMing me on WhatsApp from a number he got while I was at a previous agency. And then they'd come down and have dinner with me. And then they do some Silicon Valley stuff to incentivize me away from, my current job. And I can't talk about that, on camera here, but like they did everything they possibly could. And we went through 2 rounds of negotiations where like the first round of negotiation, I was playing hardball. I knew I had leverage. I had other offers from brands where there was more cash up front. And then I said no. And then I did consulting, came back with some more leverage, and we discussed a bit more. And then we landed on a good offer. But that was really from me having me in their office with their team during Y Combinator, incredibly stressful where they're raising their round, right? And still kind of selling me in the back burner for like 30 to 40 days. Like, it was a pretty insane acquisition process for senior talent. But I think to your point, vetting for a track record of when they're more right versus more wrong. I came from a competitor with a parallel track record that like grew them up. So it was like an easy no brainer there. But I think with junior talent, you're saying 1 to 3 years out of college, you're saying going into an affiliate marketing only agency, which is very positioned uniquely from other digital marketing agencies. How do you know those problem solving skills are even relevant? I think I spoke at a UC Berkeley for like a media and entrepreneur business event, club speak. Anyways, I was there speaking to 100 college kids with a panel. And what we found was like everyone was just regurgitating from textbooks.
Yeah.
But I feel like when you're in a startup in early stage, like everything you say in the book is wrong. When I'm like, talking to junior talent, they're like, how do we do everything perfectly? And I'm like, you have 15 clients. You're learning this week 1. How are you going to do everything perfectly? Like, well, what do you feel like is like a good proxy for like problem solving skills and grit? Do you feel like the university degree still stands to be a good indicator there? Or
I would say 60 to 70% of the time it does.
Okay.
And I think that there's a lot of trust that you need to put into a new hire. It's easier to impart that trust when they're less expensive because there's usually a longer runway or it's easier to disconnect. What you had mentioned, I'm thinking about you're going through these negotiations with the Reacher crew. And do you feel like, there's more expectation? It's a difficult position. So now that you got what you wanted, you're in.
Yeah.
Is it easier for them to be resentful that they met you where you wanted to be? And that you need to continually produce. I'm just not to turn it around. I want to answer your question, but I'm so curious.
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm objectively very young in my career. I'm 24 years old, right? So I also get underestimated in terms of my ability to produce, and I work every single day to show up better than I did last week. Yep. And with the Reacher team, I very quickly have my network of people where it's like, if I do need to bring this in, I know I can at least 2 to 3x my salary based off of the network I built. And so I know I have that hedge there. And then there's all the value that I have in my back pocket that wasn't negotiated, where it's like product. I'm doing product man. I am working with the engineering team to create the prompts for prompt engineering for our new products. I'm scoping PRDs. I'm getting on behavioral interviews with ML and AI engineers, from overseas who are coming in with very specialized talent. And I don't think they would have thought I could do any of that. So I always have something in my back pocket, and I never oversell myself during the negotiation process because I'm very aware of expectations. You can always be on the axe, when you're pushing against a founder's perspective too, and you're wrong and you have nothing to show for yourself for all the money you spent there.
Yeah.
You can get into a very sticky situation. So that's my personal philosophy there.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. But yeah, I think, it's back to your question. It's easy to tell in the first 2 to 4 weeks, you know. Also, what's crucial and what we had and we did well early on is we built a system. The systems were already built. So the exec team would create the whole concept of what we're doing, the delivery of service. We would ideate the tech stack, work with the developers to do that. And then we would fill the gaps, starting with junior talent early on. So they would have a sandbox to play in, and they would have lines to color inside. So we were not giving them mission critical, projects and hey, figure it out. We knew that, we would be there as a safety net if things fell through. And in the first 2 to 4 weeks, not only are you going to, for us, affiliate management, especially at that time, was very nuanced. It wasn't difficult to learn, but it was unique. A lot of acronyms, a lot of kind of, different, different strategies that people were unaware of that we were doing and employing well. And so the first step was, clearly, you went to Berkeley, you're capable, you're smart. Can you learn this subject matter? Here's all the data. We're going to go through training and let's have a conversation. And I want to make sure that you're fluent in speaking affiliate. And that was kind of like the first, easy measure. Does this person understand what we're doing here? And from there, once they really get that subject matter nailed, it's like, okay, now you know what you're doing. You can solve problems based on where you've been and what you've done. So let's start to give you some base hit problems and scale them up.
So what does nailed look like to you? Because I think that's the tough part with, and this might be different now with like every university student regurgitating ChatGPT and using Perplexity, and they're getting decent. And I think we're as managers and leadership starting to have a portion of our brain where it's like, this feels ChatGPT written,
For sure.
but I think like testing for that, I nailed it, I'm ready to go out. Like, what does that look like specifically in 2025 or into 2026?
Yeah. I mean, it's different, right? Back when we were doing this, AI was, pretty much obsolete. I think today what I'm noticing is it's hard to fake it when you're face to face. And I think this is a whole different kind of subject that we could get into if you want, but just like the power of being in office. And I know people hate it. And, everything happened with COVID, which we at Advertise Purple rode through, and there's a lot to talk about there. But when you're face to face with someone and you're having that conversation about a subject matter, or you're talking about problem solving, it is just a pure read on who they are and how quickly they can think on their feet. Obviously, with someone like you, it's easy, it'd be an immediate plug, and it's like, this guy's smart, and we can go back and forth, and he can think outside of the box. And, but yeah, looking, what is nailed then, what is it today? I think it's pretty much the same thing. People have a better tool set today because you have Perplexity and chat.
Totally.
So solving problems behind the curtain should be easier in theory, but you still have to humanize everything. You can't just copy paste and really rely on an AI model to do your dirty work. But that's foundational in problem solving today is, do you know how to use, chat? And I think you'd be surprised for people like us in our world, you're doing it nonstop, but there's a lot of people, even those graduating from great schools, that are new to using ChatGPT and AI. And I'm like, really? Like, you really need to? Yeah, you can load a CSV into chat. Really? But yeah, it's definitely different.
Yeah, because I think there's also a devil's advocate portion. Like, I was on an interview with a candidate the other day, and he just like looked down at his screen and looked back up, and I was just like, "Are you using AI to cheat on this interview?" I just asked him like point blank, and he was like, "Oh no, I was just like looking something up." I'm like, either way, if you are like, I don't care. I want to understand how you're using it. Like, what prompts are you putting in? What is the architecture? I think to your point, critical thinking skills of like how you put the prompt into ChatGPT can be a proxy of your ability to problem solve. Like, I was doing some research on prompt engineering, right? And it was like, you have to assign a task. You have to give a ton of context. Maybe you voice dictation dump as much context as possible because you don't know the system. And then you give that AI a persona as well, right? To then deliver that. I think, does every like college student prompt like that? Like, probably not. But if a college student can prompt like that, and they don't have 5 years of performance marketing experience, I think that's a better signal to me that they might have those problem solving skills. But I'm curious, back to your point of it takes 1 week here to kind of get a sense of if they can learn the subject matter, 2 to 4 weeks to see if they start to become grounded in your general service. Does that mean that people should be taking in junior talent in cohorts and working like that versus one-off? Like, what is the actual intake process look like if you don't really know until after the interview?
Yeah. So advice that I got early on in my kind of entrepreneurial career was hire at a minimum in pairs.
At a minimum.
At a minimum in pairs. And that's expensive positions as well. A really great guy told me that. And I started doing that at the very beginning of Advertise Purple, expensive sales assets. At that point, they were, developers hiring in pairs. So the short answer to your question is absolutely, because you need, kind of a benchmark to compare against. And what you're going to notice, it's pretty obvious, but it is so important, is there's, less founder time that goes into, kind of building up a new employee who has a sidekick. They're feeding off each other. They're working with each other. There's a lot that you get from that. It takes, they spend their own time doing it instead of asking you, hey, I need help. They're going to go to their counterpart first. But the obvious outcome is at every, month, you're like, who's better? What I noticed is, I think it was rare. Obviously, the whole concept behind that is you may release one of them if they're underperforming.
Yep. But
that never happened. So every time we hired in pairs, and then it obviously went from pairs to hiring in groups of 10, hiring in groups of 15. But in pairs, they all just kind of raise the bar together, feeding off each other, super enthusiastic. And they both made it. And I was like, wow, well, I have twice the amount of production, 2 people, killer. I'll keep them both, Yeah. When you get into larger cohorts, it becomes very slippery, especially when it's in a purely remote environment. And I think that was, a difficult part for Advertise Purple in the early 2020s. But yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because I understand the cohort idea for sales, because I think for sales, it's just like too obvious that it's performance based, it's numbers based, and like you can always press other underperforming reps into better reps rather than like tweaking their script on your own, right? Or going into their like pipeline or going into like their call recordings and actually drilling every single, script in correlation with them, right? I think it makes some people like, what about for like marketers, where it's like, what if I'm like hiring people with different levels of, I guess, experience, but similar outcomes? Like, to give you a concrete example, one of the hires we're thinking about right now is hiring, primarily women, digital marketers who excel in social media and tech, who excel in community, because these things can't be automated. And we're looking at making a decision of hiring an intern and then a community or like a partnership specialist. And we're going to bring them both in, but like one is 19 and the other one is 22, but they've both generated millions in impressions on their social medias, right? Is that a pair that, with those 2 characteristics I've given you, sort of makes sense? Or would you align them both in like a 22 against 22 sort of situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think just kind of getting a bit of altitude on that. It works, sales obvious, ops obvious, for us with account managers and with analysts back in kind of the midlife of Advertise Purple. Hiring at scale worked well for those departments. Specialty hires, it might be a bit different. Although I think the philosophy still kind of retains traction in that it's clearly going to be more expensive, but each of those 2 candidates that you mentioned brings something unique to the table. You're not going to know what that is until they've like executed it, right? There's only so much you can learn in an interview, in multiple interviews, in the whole courting process, in the whole honeymoon process of the first 90 days. But what is irrefutable is the opportunity cost of either losing one or both, or not hiring the right fit. You spend 90 days with the 19-year-old because she seems to be a better fit. You get to, right around that moment, and she leaves, she found a better job. You're like, oh my God, you go back to the second one, she's gone. So I think when you have a crucial role and you're at the size Reacher is, the whole concept of hiring in groups is even more pertinent, because you just can't absorb the loss and the time that it'll take if someone leaves or if you're not finding what you want.
Do you think that this idea of hiring in groups plays at every stage of the company's journey? I think the first 10 people, like every single person almost changes the culture as they come in, right? Like if I'm going from hiring let's say there's like 3 people. Let's say there's like me, head of engineering, and then another engineer, and like we're hiring, a designer, right? Like I think, would we hire 2 designers for like the 5th and 6th hire together? Or would that really work more with like the 12th and 13th or 20th and 21st hire together?
Yeah, I think when you really start to grow quickly, those measured hires, it like goes out the window.
Really?
I mean, it gets sloppy,
Interesting.
And that's the truth.
There are some nuances around culture, right? I think, for example, Bora and Jerry bringing me into Reacher, I think drastically changes the culture. I have
for
opinions.
better or worse.
Up for debate. Time will tell. Time will tell, you know. But for better or worse, right? The culture is going to change. I bring my own opinions on how systems should be built. You know, what should like performance look like, QA, things like that, right? And like, you know, we've been making different hiring decisions and scaling decisions, like me in the conversation in the room because of that, right? So I would say like if we hired like 2 head of GTMs in a pod 5 to 7, it might be different than hiring like 2 sales directors 21 to 20, right? Or let me know if I'm off base, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, your comment, I'm curious, now that you're kind of like in the founder circle,
Yeah.
do you find there to be tension? You know, if you're taking Jerry's side and, you know, Bora's like, what? Like how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I think that's also with earlier stage hires, what I always vet for is like, how do you handle extreme founder personalities? And if there's co-founders, what is the relationship? I asked Bora and Jerry, I'm like, how do you guys solve problems when people disagree? It's like, who handles what? Why was that decision made? Oh, you guys started multiple companies before? Like, who was in charge and who led to different decisions that ultimately compounded that way in retro? And I try to get as much information there. I think with Bora and Jerry, they do a very good job trusting each other to handle their respective functions. Jerry is usually more involved on the product and engineering and design side, and Bora is involved in the go-to-market side. So usually there's like a rule where they've talked to themselves where it's like, hey, if it's a go-to-market decision, a sales and marketing decision, like Bora, you have the final say. If it's a product decision on like what we're going to build and how much engineering resources are going to be spent, Jerry is there. So usually it's like very clear and there isn't some overlap.
Yeah. That's good. They kind of divide and conquer. That's a great approach to it.
They've known each other for 8 years and they've done multiple companies together.
Yeah.
So it's not their first rodeo or they're strangers who are, you know, crossing each. Like it's not like Jerry and Bora can both equally take sales calls and have different perspectives, right?
Yeah.
So I think like back to the point, it's just like if you bring in people early on with different opinions, you lead to different decisions that compound more down the line. And so my thought process is if I bring in 2 big voices at an earlier stage where we need to move fast, that could result in maybe twice as different of an outcome down the line, or we move slower because there's more voices here.
Right. Or does it result in better listeners?
Or better listeners.
Very good, you know, within the walls of a company. I think listening is a very undervalued skill set with hires, especially senior level hires or those who want to negotiate a lot.
Yeah.
You know, they come in and they have a gravitas and a bravado and I want this, I want that. They're negotiating with you. And then you finally let them in the door. And, you know, do you really want them to continue with that amount of momentum? It's like, okay, like, you know, the song and dance is done. You got what you wanted, but you need to better understand what we're trying to accomplish here. You need to listen. And I think, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, that was always one of the points of tension with senior level hires for us was, you know, their ability to listen to kind of a backseat. And we wanted to start with that. We wanted to impart the founding DNA upon them. But yeah, I think, again, you know, like I was saying earlier, you know, when you really begin to scale and you're like I also mentioned, we went from, I don't know, John probably talked about this, maybe 30 to 40 to 70 employees in like 3 to 4 months, and then to 100 3 months after that. I mean, it went so fast. And so this whole concept of controlled hiring and thoughtful hiring, unfortunately, it just doesn't exist.
Interesting.
And everything changes, right? I mean, everything, when you begin to open the floodgates and let everybody in. We had to hire, you know, director of HR. And so those contacts were doing the hiring and their vision was completely different from mine. And that is when the company, in my opinion, you know, didn't take a dive, or it just changed.
Yeah.
Much different than what it was originally. Different type of person, different type of vision, different type of goal. But yeah, it's interesting.
Did your director of HR believe in cohort-based hiring like you did, or were they more like, let's run a personality test, let's look for certain behavioral attributes here in the screening rounds and things like that?
They all had a different opinion on how it was done. We went through multiple.
Interesting.
You know, we had, you know, behavioral traits and tests, and then we had others who were hiring people close to them who they knew from the industry. but we, never, it's tough because there's like multiple variables at this point, right? There was that type of hiring going on, group scaled hiring, and we were fully remote. So all of a sudden we went from having people that were in Santa Monica that we could go to happy hour with and I could sit next to and really connect with, to some, dude in Maine who is just a resume and, did well on a couple interviews. Now he's managing a team. But yeah, that I think when you guys get to the point where you have others doing the hiring, that's a scary part in a company. I almost think that there should be, in hindsight, I should have continued to play that role. That should have been part of the CEO's role, despite it being a total time suck. It really is, again, in hindsight, it's insurance on the future of the brand in the company.
I mean, I know like even Naval was saying this on his own podcast where it's like, it's not a technology game, it's actually a recruiting game, right? And founders should, be hiring everyone. I mean, I guess like why, if it's so important, do like founders ever step away? Like why aren't they just freaking chief hiring officer and not CEO?
I mean, in the heat of battle, thinking back when we were doing it, I was connected at the hip with John. We were looking at P&Ls. We were looking at, revenue margin. We're looking at all of these numbers coming in. We're looking at, a scaled service, with an excessive amount of clients. And we need to provide the same level of service that we did 2 years ago with a fraction of those clients.
Yep.
So we need people now. Yeah. They didn't go to that great of a school. What? Like, we just need them. Just bring them in. The system is strong enough. Their managers are smart enough. And I think that we cut some corners. We hired multiple directors of HR, and we never kind of were able to get back to that, core fabric that really allowed the company to scale up in the early days. The interesting thing is, people have asked me, so the caliber of candidate and employee that you hired, after you guys scaled, was it lower? Were they, not as smart, not as capable as the early round? Did you just get lucky with those first handful of hires? No, they're all the same. And I think that
really,
yeah, without a doubt, like it's just, we didn't have the time to sit with them. The exec team, the senior level crew, we didn't have the time to actually onboard them properly and to work with them and to understand what makes them tick and plug them kind of into our, plan for Advertise Purple. It just became scaled. It became a bit sloppy at times. And we were relying on, people beneath people to do the onboarding, which again, in hindsight, I think it's tragic for a brand scaling.
I think it's interesting the points you mentioned, because I think, let's say like, I'm going to put some numbers down. I feel like when you're going from like 10 to 30, the hiring decisions you make early on become clear because like things start breaking, right? The foundation isn't as strong as you thought, right? And I think that's what people are realizing. But I think, there's a component to it where I think the earlier hires do have to work a little harder than the later hires. Like I think, maybe they're like more or less the same on paper, but like, how do you get them to like really, really do more? And how do you vet them upstream for that during the interview process, right? I think the fundamental part of like what founders have to deal with is they have to find the talent, but then they have to motivate them and reward them highly, right? And I know like this is something that I always talk to a ton of agency founders. Like agency founders never give out equity. Like I think I've talked to like so many agency founders and like they're all just like, oh, I own 100% of the company. And tech founders always have ESOP or like a pool of like 10% or 20% where it's designated for the founding team. And like I'm thinking about it, I'm like, is the model or the business of scaling an agency become very like, cut and dry and like you just place people into roles versus like in tech, is it more ambiguous? Does each person have to create different systems and communicate cross-functionally more? Like why is there such a, I guess like aversion to giving equity and incentivizing earlier hires there between tech and agency?
It's really interesting. I had no idea about the agency thing.
I have like 4 to 5 agency CEOs in my network, and all of them almost own 100% of the company, and they don't give out any equity. But I'm like, I've been in an agency where I'm creating a new vertical and department, and it's hard. It's like I'm talking to the sales team. They're asking me questions about how to sell to certain prospects, and then we have to scope it. And if we don't scope it right, all the account managers we hire, their utilization rate sucks, and then everyone's over servicing. Clients are unhappy, churn's bad, deliveries down, brands down the drain. Okay, and then it just all goes downhill. But it's like if that first hire isn't capable of looking at ops, looking at BD, looking at positioning for the company, navigating the CEO's demands on different acquisition targets they want to hit while protecting the team's time for like, if that person doesn't have that ability to tightrope walk and learn something new, if it's like TikTok shop where there's no like historical data on how to do it, like how do you incentivize them to take on such a big problem that no one else is going to take on without equity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll answer the kind of last portion first, which is like, with ClickMint, which is, truly a tech forward AI company, it is taking more of like a shared responsibility approach. So to your point, I'm beginning to see that it is in fact different than what an agency was, scaling up early on. So my whole, clenching on to equity as tight as I did, that may not, that may be out the window for ClickMint. So far it hasn't, but I could just see how, the types of roles that you onboard for a tech play are different in terms of their responsibility and their autonomy.
Yeah.
Agency, in my opinion and in my experience, it's a more predictable path that is really carved out by the first person. I remember, obviously, 2012, I was at a co-working space desk in Santa Monica. That's how I started Advertise Purple. It was just me. It was, me at this desk that was like $99 a month.
Yeah.
And, in my mind, I was part of this big company, but it was just me, and so I would build these systems that only I would follow. It was, there were moments where I'm like, I'm going crazy. I'm like playing house, you know? And then all of a sudden you have 2 employees and then 20 and then 50 and everybody's following the same system that I built at that desk on 2nd Street in Santa Monica by myself, right? And so going back to maybe one of the reasons that agency founders try to retain equities because of that, right? They were the first person to get the major client, to build the system, to deliver the service. And so on paper, and I think viscerally, it felt like that. So when we had employee 5 or 15 or 55, it was like, you're going to use the playbook that I used back in the day, and there'll be ways that we modify it for scale and for different types of clients. But to answer your question, to take that into, well, how do you incentivize those early employees? It's pride of work.
Well, just before you dive into that, to paraphrase your current point, it sounds like the value in an agency is the initial system you built. Is this system scalable? Does the system allow us to bring on the next couple clients? Does this system actually hold when I bring in 5 people? And no one is taking on that burden except for the CEO. Like that system itself is the, predictor on like, is this agency going to be successful or not? And by the time you hire enough people, there isn't as much leeway to then tweak the system and have ownership of it. Am I understanding that correctly there?
You're exactly right.
Okay.
And I think with the technology, right, it's changing, it's adapting, it's improving constantly.
Yeah.
With an agency, I don't think it's moving at that pace.
Interesting. So I think like going back to like let's say like everything you're saying holds true. That makes sense why agency, but for tech and for hiring those early employees, let's look at an incentivization model you might deploy at ClickMint that's more similar to like what's traditionally followed in like YC best practices or tech best practices, right? Shared ownership. I think a parallel here is like, I'm head of go-to-market at Reacher, leading sales and marketing, but in my compensation, I don't have an individual commission plan, and that was like purposeful, probably by the founders and by me, to be incentivized by greater goals than like short-term sales, right? And so equity itself is essentially what I am bound to in the feedback loops I create. If I focus on brand and I focus on product before I get to sales and maximize bonuses there, I'm working to make my equity more valuable. And that's like the feedback loop that, I see, and, our CEO has told me to, where it's like, hey, like, if you want to spend an extra 20 hours on the weekend, it makes sense because you have ownership and you're working to get like a 10x upside on your equity from like the tech multiple. And like, that's where I see it, but I think I haven't built a company like you have and had the equity on the founder's side. Like, what are the concerns? Like, what are the things you're thinking about when you're bringing in, let's say, this role where you're trying to bring in that VP or CMO of like marketing for brand placements, pods, events, right? That's a crucial role that you probably can't do all on your own, right?
Yeah. It's funny how you talk about it because I'm a lot older than you. I have more experience, but you sound like you have it more figured out.
I just talk
Isn't
a
that
lot.
funny? I'm like listening to you. I'm like, I've done it all wrong. Someone's got it nailed. But it's like it's funny, like, how YC and in these kind of incubators that have turned into systematic approaches towards scaling a company. I mean, like back in the day, we had in my office space, there was, what was the name of it? MySpace. It was that old. He came in Santa Monica, started an incubator. But I mean, when I was doing it, there wasn't like documented literature and paperwork on how you approach this. You know what I mean? And especially coming off of the first company I started where we raised money, I was like, I'm not going to raise money. So my, methodologies will be completely different because I'm self-funding. The people that I pick, the amount of equity that I retain, it's just different than it, than it kind of has turned into. But to your point, like with ClickMint, I think that what I'm noticing is, ML, AI engineers, people like that, they really can take what a group of humans did over a 6-month period, do it in 6 hours.
Yeah.
And so appending a value to that transcends cash. It just does. It's irrefutable. As much as I want to say, I'm, going to use the same playbook I did back in the day, it doesn't apply. And then you introduce the competitive nature of the AI world and what we're doing in tech. If they're not getting it from you, they're going to get it from someone else.
Yeah.
And so I think at that point, what we're experiencing now is exactly that is, okay, let's think about an ESOP plan. Let's think about a different approach towards compensation. But also, what does that mean? Like, what are the expectations that come along with providing equity? Because I think that I've also noticed is almost unfair to the recipient of the equity. If you're giving points to an employee, you can't tell them to work on the weekends. You just want them to work on the weekends.
Yeah.
Did you feel like, is there a clear line of when you should work and when you shouldn't be working? Do you ever feel like, well, because I'm working towards X, I need to be working nonstop, and that's just the way that it is?
I mean, I think like for me, I was raised by a family of immigrants where I think work ethic and immigrant survivorship were very commonly like associated, and I think I've always been someone who like, I need to work twice as hard to prove myself, given my backgrounds and what we're coming to the country to do, so I think I've always been instilled with like, you've got to outwork everyone else, and that's a baseline. And so I think that's where I've come in. And like, I think throughout my career, it's been reinforced. I think even at my first agency, I was given more responsibility, and I knew that I couldn't take on more responsibility because of where I wanted to be if I didn't work into the weekends and get that maker's time, get that creative time to learn the skills. On the weekends, I would be studying new books on like project management because like I didn't know what project management was in college. And then I would go and take ChatGPT and apply a chapter of that book to a problem a client gave me. Right. And then I would have to learn that and SOPify it the next week. If I didn't work on the weekends, like that just wouldn't be possible. And then I saw the return from that. And I'm hardwired for short-term returns and feedback. Like it's the sales psychology, right? So when I see the feedback and I see the green light, I just do more and more of it. And so where I'm at right now is like, I understand the effects of like compounding work on the weekends. And that's why I'm here at 24 years old, making decisions at Reacher that, most 24-year-olds would not be in the right mind to do.
That's wild, bro.
I mean, I'm sure you put in even more work than me starting your own companies.
Yeah, but I think it's much different, right?
Yeah.
There are very few. I mean, God, we've hired a lot of people over the years. And I would say that less than 1% have your perspective and your approach. John is one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very difficult to find. You can find people that have that mentality for finite amount of time, for 3 to 6 months or maybe 12 months, and then drops off a cliff. They become resentful. They're like, F this, I'm not doing it. Like, I'm sacrificing so much. What am I getting in return? Also, what is going to change with Reacher, in I'm sure in a positive way, is the value will continue to grow. So, you're going to see the fruits of your labor coming to fruition. You're going to feel energized to work over the weekend. But what about when that changes? What if it does change faster than later? And in other words, if Reacher wasn't scaling at the pace that it is right now, would you still be working on the weekend? Or would you be like, wow, I'm doing all this stuff. I am improving my ability to provide value at this company, but nobody else is, it's not growing. It's not scaling. I don't think there's going to be an exit. So it's really, in my opinion, again, kind of tying back to, what are the expectations when you give equity out? Is the expectations that you're turning something that was a race to an employee into a marathon. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, because there's gonna be times when things fall off a cliff. Yeah. When, the enterprise value of Reacher takes a pause or takes a dip temporarily. Sure. Do you have the character trait to be able to absorb that and to keep pushing through it? Or are you going to look left and right and be like, well, where's Reacher number 2? Yeah. And that to me is the mark of someone who really deserves equity. And that you may follow up with this question, which I don't have an answer for, but it's like, well, how do you find those people? You don't know until you're in it. There's been people that we've broken off ownership to at Advertise Purple, that when times got tough, they bowed out and they just couldn't handle it,
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take a different angle. I agree. It's kind of hard, like, to find your Jonathan just like in the sea of recruit. I don't even think a recruiter can find someone like that, because like,
did he tell you how we met? Like,
no, he told me he was at an outsourced CFO company, and then you let him take a client call once, and he got into client relations, and then eventually he was gonna graduate, and you were like, I can't lose you, and then that's what he told me so far. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a bit more to it. He was at, so at that point, my wife was in marriage and family therapy master's program at USC. And so someone, one of her close friends, her husband started this CFO, this like temporary CFO, firm, whatever. And so John was kind of like on my account. And so, I noticed how scrappy he was. That was the first thing that I noticed. Yeah. It's like, this dude is scrappy. And we were working at that point on AR. So, issuing tons and tons of invoices. We were scaling quickly. At that point, as the CEO, I'm like, the money just needs to start coming in, because I'm focused on hiring. At that point, I was really into hiring. And so, the original contact at that CFO firm just wasn't really into AR. He was like, I was like, dude, you need to call these people and get the money, you know? And he's like, oh, well, Jonathan's on your account. See if he'll do it. And so John, that was like the beginning. I was like, John, I was like, you need to like get in there and get us paid. There's all these open invoices. Yeah. And so John, it was one of those moments where I think in my relationship with every great employee, they just figure it out and they do it themselves. And they don't ask, wait, Kyle, but what if they get mad at me on the call? Yeah. Like John is just like, throw me in. Like, I don't even care. I'm on it. And then he comes out the other end. And he didn't 10 days later say, oh, look how good I did. Like, look at all these invoices that were paid. He just kept going. And it was just like, boom, part of the business. Oh, this guy gels. He doesn't need a pat on the back. I can tell he grinds. And then, when when, you know, like he mentioned he was going to graduate, I was like, let's do this together. I want you on board. It would be great if you could have, although you were doing for Reacher, you were doing consulting. So there is kind of that, you know, try it before you buy it. Yeah. It'd be nice if you could have that with more employees.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting with John, because like one of the biggest pain points of a founder of an agency is probably like dealing with client fires and chasing down people to like pay you.
100%.
And it's funny because your consulting for him was like, hey, go and do this founder level activity.
Yeah.
Right. And like he kind of did that. I mean, I might be thinking out loud here. Is there a way to create an incentive package where you're reinforcing founder-led behaviors with earlier hires and rewarding them highly for taking on ownership? Like, does that package or does that model of like positive feedback loops exist without necessarily giving equity?
It did at that point. I mean, he didn't have equity. He didn't have equity in the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'm hesitant of people. The thing is, it's, you know, the whole startup culture and scale culture is different now than it was back then. People come to the table with their hands out now. And, you know, a lot of people don't. But I feel like more times than not in the recent, you know, hiring rounds that I've been doing for ClickMint, it's expected, right? It's expected that they're onboarded with equity. And for me, I would rather, I'm okay doing that, especially now. But I would rather someone say, you know what, let me show you what I can do. And then I'm going to ask for more. You know, do you have an equity package? Yeah, potentially. I want more than you're going to give me, but let me show you why. So let's do like 90, 180 days. I'm going to bring value to the table. And so that to me, actions speak louder than words, is huge. So to your point, I think that, you know, there could be a world where, you know, founder type responsibilities are kind of nestled into job functions. But it's hard at the beginning, you know, of a relationship. If you want great talent, you have to give it up early on. You know?
It's weird. And I think it gets really weird, like as you scale. Cause like, I think let's go back to like earlier where we're talking about if these early employees are incentivized correctly, the foundation is built well for like hire number 30, right?
Yeah.
But if they're not, I think even the corners they cut and the things they miss, even the system's like 80% there, it starts to like break, right? If you are in my shoes, you know, thinking about how to incentivize the earliest talent, right? And you can put together all kinds of like comp systems, comp plans, like what sort of behavior would you want to reinforce in earlier hires through compensation to make sure they have ownership of their work?
Is that it's performance based in one way or another. I think the caveat is, you know, at that time when we were scaling that quickly, I wasn't overthinking hiring. I know I told you about like my whole kind of ethos to hiring and what was my calculus and what did I look for. You know, that was very easy to execute, right? I scroll straight down to where'd you go to school? What was your GPA? What relevant coursework did you take? Okay, I want to talk to you. I want to hear you. Before you know it, they're in the office before you know they're hired. And I say this with all due respect.
Yeah, go for it.
I think that you're overthinking it. You know what I mean? Like, listen, it's great to hire great people and you're going to have great people, but the Reacher brand is going to be successful without great people.
True.
And that is important because of you, because of Jerry, because of Bora. You guys have a great crew, a great founding crew. And you're going to have a lot of bad hires. And that's something I'm just going to get out there because you need to accept it now. There's going to be a lot of bad hires, a lot of shitty hires. And Advertise Purple had the same early on. Even the founding group, if you will, whether that's 10 or 15 or 20, all of that's debatable, right? Everybody that comes in, employee number 55, employee number 155, you talk to them individually, they were the reason Advertise Purple was successful. You know, you're going to have that at Reacher. But there's a high likelihood Advertise Purple would have been successful without them. There's just no doubt. And so I think for you guys to be in the market where you're at, to have the technology that you do at this point in time, you guys are on it. You're going to do well. And, you know, paralysis by analysis, you're just sitting there overthinking hires. Just move forward.
Interesting. Okay. So let's say, you know, I'm completely wrong, which I'm totally open to being completely wrong. I know there's like a ton I need to learn, right? So let's say, you know, we're growing. We're on our way to 30 employees. I think QA is like the biggest thing at agencies, like making sure like the parts I don't like most about management are like following up, making sure people are hitting their due dates, right? Tasks aren't like, is this being done to the instructions that are listed in a document, right? I think to your point, the compounding effects of having a brand multiplied are where founders and execs should be spending their business time, right? But then there's also QA, where it's like if you don't have that, your brand gets diluted while you're trying to grow it on the other end.
Yeah.
When we're hiring and we onboard these people, right? What should the balance be in early stage companies where everyone still has a direct line of communication to the founder or founding team? QA and branding matter a ton. I need to spend my time on branding, evangelizing, compounding activities rather than like knocking out one sales call. But then I also need to hire a team to take over those activities and make sure that doesn't dilute the brand. At stage 10 to 30 employees, everyone still has some sort of connection to the founder or founding team. Is there a specific balance that sort of worked well for you when you're hiring, especially junior employees coming in there?
I mean, the thing is, this isn't ego talking. It's just the way of the world is people always want to connect with a founder, right? Like you're going to have employee 30 and they're like, oh, yeah, oh, wow. So you started this company.
Yeah.
And they want to show you that they care. They want to show you that they're doing a good job. They want all of that.
Yeah.
And, your Slack's going to be blowing up. The way that I kind of shouldered that off was just having people like John, people who are kind of in the upper echelon of exec. They would take those calls. They would spend the time with those employees. And then, you quickly begin, not quickly, there's a gradual process of you kind of becoming more of an elevated leader. But you still need to be engaged. So I think it's a slippery slope, right? Because if you begin to dismiss the new hires at, let's say, 30 employees, they are going to be like, F this place. Like, I don't know the founder. It's not like it's, Salesforce. I don't know the founder. It's not that big of a company. So I think I found creative ways to remain engaged with like new onboards and new hires that were coming in. We did a lot of culture-based activities around town back when we were scaling at that point. And I think that was critical. I got a lot of FaceTime with like new hires.
So early hires aside, right? I think one of the things you're doing that's super interesting to me is ClickMint, this new venture you're doing that's obviously tech-based. That's why I'm more interested. Just kidding. I don't think Advertise Purple is boring. But you showed it to me at the office, and I thought it was really, really interesting. I want to get into how it first started, where you came up with the idea. I know it was around the time you were actually still like, working in Advertise Purple, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was conceptually, everything started kind of churning in my mind, probably like late 2023. At that point, I had stepped away from Advertise Purple, moved up to a board position, a very active board position. And then early 2024 is when I kind of pulled the trigger. Mid 2024, started hiring, development team and really trying to build kind of like a POC. Before that, I mean, just my experience at Advertise Purple in the position that I was in for so long was getting a deep dive into what made e-com tick. Like what was successful with these brands? Why do 10% of all of the brands that we've serviced just crush it and others don't? And they have similar products. Like what are we missing here? And it Advertised Purple, what I think when I left, it was roughly, we had serviced like 5,000 clients. There's just a lot of exposure that I had. So during that time, I was, again, kind of ruminating about what can we do to improve outcomes here with our client base?
Yep.
And conversion rate optimization was always up there at the top of the list. And it was something that, to date, in my opinion, and in the opinions of e-com directors and C-level people and founders, it's so cumbersome and so expensive that people kind of look the other way.
So let's start at a baseline. Like, what is conversion rate optimization? And like, why is it even important for anyone to be doing it?
It's a good question. conversion rate optimization is basically identifying and understanding how shoppers behave on your website. So pure D2C play, DTC play. Your shoppers are coming in, and what path are they taking? Is there a way to improve, their travel from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel, to the purchase, to the add to cart event? This has been, something that has been going on for, eons. I mean, CRO, I think Tim Ash was one of the first guys back in the day that wrote this book about landing page optimization. This was like back in the day. He was kind of like the godfather of it at that point. And since then there's like been a small cohort of like core agency brands. And now there's a larger group of like SaaS platforms, and it's turning into a lot of fragmented Shopify plugins that help people improve the on-site engagement of their shoppers. But with the advent of AI and with tweaking AI, it's like kind of just blown the top off. And that's where I think ClickMint is providing a very valuable service to better understand how shoppers are engaging with brands and what can we do to improve their experience, i.e. generate more sales.
So I want to like drive into it a bit more specifically on like an implication level, right? Like what does it look like when brands set up a good conversion rate optimized system versus a very bad one?
Just like using a Shopify template. I mean, most people are, they get into Shopify and they have their templates and they design, using their gut. I mean, that's the worst, right? Is you're using kind of a prefab out of the box solution for a site architecture. And in your mind, it's like, whatever, I'm just going to make a great product, or I'm going to buy traffic from channels that I know convert. And then you kind of cross your fingers. So I think there's extremes, right? That's like on the very entry level end.
And why is that bad?
I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think it's just people don't understand the implications of a low converting site until you have scale. Average e-com conversion rates on, DTC sites are anywhere between 3 to 5%, depending on a host of variables, but they've been sliding over the last year. Conversion rates are dropping, and again, when you think about the implications of that, improving a conversion rate from 3 to 5 to 6%, you're effectively doubling the sales. So the proportionate ratio of outcomes is tied to that conversion rate. And I think that is what is happening today, especially what we're doing at ClickMint. We're leveraging AI. We're able to identify what's wrong with the site, create a diagnostic, and then immediately take action and create custom shopping funnels based on user engagement and user activity. And like I said, the outcome is in scenarios, doubling conversion rate, tripling, quadrupling conversion rate. So all of a sudden, your mind kind of expands. You're like, oh, so does that mean my CAC cost is lower for every channel? Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Like there's just a host of benefits that come along with an improved conversion rate that most people are unaware of until it's either happening or until they're looking at their budget and they're like, I can't spend anymore. Like I'm breaking even, on Instagram or on TikTok. Like this isn't making sense. I either need to get my product for less money, or I need to source. There's just not working. And CRO conversion rate, improving that is now, again, with the use of various types of LLMs that we're doing here at ClickMint, it's becoming a real option for people to spin up design variants, address, shopping behaviors and improve conversion rates.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking at is super important because it's almost like a hidden leak. I think people are always thinking about, to your point, how do we drive more traffic and how do we create products that people want to buy? But fundamentally, there is a place in the middle where all of this goodwill and all this traffic and eyeballs you're building just fall off because the website isn't optimized. And I think for most of the people listening, conversion rate optimization feels like this super big black box where you have to have all these variables. You have to have proper UX, UI design, or user experience, user interface design, right? You have to have session tracking on your website to understand where people are dropping off and where to optimize. You have to think about it from a performance marketing standpoint and put together experiments. I think it becomes very complex and very hard to manage. But what you've done is you've AIified the process with LLMs. And when you're using LLMs or AI, that means you've identified a clear input to output equation where you've sort of simplified the process into certain components. If you were to explain what ClickMint does to a fifth grader and how it helps people get one step better at conversion rate optimization tomorrow, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Like it's such a deep, dense environment. You know, there's so many layers to the onion of conversion rate optimization, but I think simplifying it for a fifth grader, it would be, you know, we are able at ClickMint to create custom shopping funnels based on the behavior of the traffic source. And when you think about that, your mind starts to really grasp the concept. You think about a user coming over from TikTok, right? Primarily, they have attention span that of a gnat. You know, they're looking for something that has been, you know, on TikTok, or they're coming over from Pinterest. They want to see pinned items. You know, they have in their mind what they want on a site. And because of that, with a host of our clients, we're noticing, you know, social channels have a completely different user behavior. And so to date, how do you address that? First of all, how do you even diagnose it? I mean, we work with large brands, you know, blue chip brands that they have teams of, you know, data analysts that are thumbing through GA4 and watching Hotjar videos all day, and they're still trying to identify patterns. The beauty of LLMs is data management and, you know, understanding through data. And so what we're able to do at ClickMint again is isolate, understand the type of behavior coming in from a social channel, and then we can create a UX adjustment. So we create their own experience. And we do that by leveraging other LLMs to create redesigns and immediately inject them in the site and tune it specifically for that traffic source.
All right, let's take one step back, right? So I've seen what you're saying live, and it's incredible. And it is that simple. Like, I've seen you just do a couple clicks, inject a new experiment into the website and start testing it, which I think is great. I think the speed of testing is something that you guys are doing, and that is so invaluable because to set up those tests, right, it's like $10,000 to $30,000 a test, right? And I think let's get more into like specifics. So let's say I'm an influencer who's like seeing this cool like poolside piece of content where someone is just having these steel mugs that just keep my scotch cool, right? And then that traffic from TikTok is being driven to the website. This website is completely unoptimized to handle that traffic, right? Of someone being like, oh, I love this cup because it makes my poolside experience with my friends cool. Like, how does ClickMint take in information like that and improve conversion rate on that kind of traffic?
Right. So the diagnostic is grouping in terms of like traffic source, right? So we're leveraging a variety of data inputs, primarily, you know, GA4 is a big one, Hotjar, any sort of RAG, additional data layer that's being captured by the brand gets kind of ported into our, you know, brain, if you will. And we see patterns in those people coming from TikTok who are looking at that mug. They want to go directly to that mug, or they have, aside from the mug, we've noticed that their downstream tracking, they always click on the mug and then they click on like a koozie, or they click on like two specific hats. We see patterns. It's as simple as that, as pattern recognition. And it's not just, you know, in a simplified world, it would be like, oh, well, just have the landing page be the mug from TikTok. It's not as simple as that, because they're doing other things on the site. They're returning to the site and they're shopping specific products. There may be a price point that they see that they're hunting for. All of these things are factored in when we create a redesign for their landing page experience, in their shopping experience.
I think that makes sense. I think, and for those who aren't familiar, like Google Analytics 4, Hotjar, that's more like just getting data on users,
data
right?
analytics,
Like
yeah.
what's happening in the sessions. And then RAG, retrieval augmented generation, is just bringing in additional context for the queries you're bringing ChatGPT. That's simply what Kyle was saying earlier. If you want to attach a spreadsheet to data that someone wants to analyze, rather than just saying like analyze this kind of data, it's like analyze this kind of data. Here's how we've analyzed it in a spreadsheet before. So that's what they're layering on top of traditional conversion rate optimization. And I want to play devil's advocate here. I want to understand why can't people just, hire a performance marketer who can sit in GA4, has 10 to 15 years of experience with Hotjar GA4, and is using Replo to just easily take in different landing page designs. Like, where's your guys' edge, given that you're a technology?
Yeah, so I think the diagnostic in and of itself is unique the way that we leveraged it. The prompt engineering behind the scenes, I think, is also important. So the output of our diagnostic is unique and specific to each brand. The ease of use that you had mentioned, which your hire would have difficulty doing, is specifically creating suggestions based on those learnings. There's going to be a gap for that type of hire. And we have a lot of brands that have that type of hire that haven't found success. Between, okay, now I think I know what's going on. How do I create a design to improve that? That is where I think we've done a great job. Obviously, room for improvement always, but we have our models provide those suggestions. So for each page, each traffic source, we have a host of suggestions in our design portion of the business where we can click on the suggestions. And like you saw at the office in Malibu, it spins up the design variant that is completely unique. The UX adjustment, the UI changes, it's on brand. It's not a template that you're forcing in. It's not a WYSIWYG drag and drop from like Optimizely or ABTAC.
Yeah.
So the coding, the design is completely and utterly bespoke, which I think is a big plus, especially for the brands in our ICP that we're working with. That is the number one issue that they have is, I do not want you to mess up our brand image. Like, you're talking about doing UX and UI tweaks. I don't want some templatized lead gen capture form right, on the homepage.
I think that's cool because you're bringing in another hire in there, which is a brand marketer, creative, and designer, which like I think if you bring in a growth marketer into there to run these experiments, like they might get to some like baseline level template that optimizes it to a certain degree. But I think for these bigger brands you're working with, the brand equity is really the biggest, variable that you can't mess up.
Yeah.
Like you can't optimize for a couple $100,000 and crush millions in brand equity. So I think one, isolating the need for additional hires to protect that brand equity, plus the performance marketers' capabilities, plus the context of an LLM to take in multiple different signals or a lot of noise and then turn that into signals. I think that's where the beauty is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the execution is seamless. I think when you look at kind of what's out there on the market and you consider all of the fragmented Shopify plugins, the A/B testing platforms are cumbersome. They're usually slow loading. There's just a lot of kind of negative attributes that we've learned over the, last couple months about these. And so we're able to, create that bespoke design and immediately deploy it and have, by the time, you set up a diagnostic, we plug in all of the RAG data to deploying an experiment. I mean, it could be under an hour. It's pretty phenomenal.
Interesting.
So like you had mentioned earlier, that is not only an expensive process in the past, 10 to 30 grand per experiment, a lot of question marks. You're not sure what you're going to get. But it's a, really long timeline. You have to get the coder, you have to get the designer, or you have to customize something in the WYSIWYG platform. And so I think we've done a good job of really being able to kind of take, a diagnostic and learnings all the way to execution in a very short time frame. So you can maximize that conversion rate in time for a holiday, in time for one particular event. Yeah. So
I think it's awesome because I think there's 2 points here, right? One, to get there's also the developer and UX. Like, I didn't even think about this. There's a developer, UX designer, brand marketer, performance marketer to just run experiments. The experiments are slower. You're in the meantime paying for traffic to come in that isn't converting. So the opportunity cost is, you're actually losing out on purchases that could have happened if you ran an experiment earlier that didn't take 4 people to plan out and get
Right.
activated and maybe even interpret the wrong signal from all the data. I guess like what do the compounding effects of like running more experiments look like for your conversion rate optimization now, like getting started now versus delaying it and being more methodical and precise and going slower?
Yeah, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. You look at the numbers, some of the brands that we've run, and in a matter of weeks. Obviously, each individual experiment, we try to reach statistical relevance, and we have that power signal, and it depends on the amount of traffic,
Yep.
on the history. There's a lot of variables involved before we can say that an experiment was a clear success.
Yep.
But for the most part, we get early signs, early indications that this is like crushing it. This variant is completely outperforming the control. Or let's be iterative. That's another great thing about the tech is we're able to say, hey, variant A is underperforming based on your impact analysis. It's not quite hitting the ATC add to cart rate or the CVR conversion rate that you had told us model. What should we do? Oh, change this, add that. So we do like variant B and we can start. So we can move so fast. But the compounding effect is, improved outcomes. I mean, it's as simple as that. The KPI is different per page, right? If you're on a PLP product listing page, you're looking at click-through rate, you're looking at bounce rate, you're looking at downstream behavior. They looked at, product listing page of 55 steel cups. Which one are people clicking on? Are they making their way to the PDP, to the product detail page? And so there's so much data that can be derived from making those adjustments early on that can positively impact the business. And again, to people who are new to CRO or to people that have done it in the past and hired agencies for, copious amounts of money, they're like, oh my God, my head's going to explode. It takes too long. It's too expensive. But we have really simplified and truncated the whole experience, which makes it cool and again, very beneficial to people who are like, show me what you got in like 60 days. Like, I want to see returns. It's become something where we can like pull it off pretty quickly.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the iterative process and I like the course correcting process because I'm thinking, especially for marketing leaders and CMOs thinking down the line, what do like the decisions we make right now lead to our 6-year, our 12-year, our 12-month, 24-month outcomes, right? And I think the ability to get signal from AI earlier and course correct early while still keeping the pace, like I love that. I think that's super cool. I am curious, and this might be more of like a tech focused question, right?
Yeah.
What does like noise to signal look like when you're ingesting all this data? I think one thing I'm doing at Reacher is like, our freaking engineering team has got me in Google AI Studio. Like I'm starting to work on my own like prompt engineering and I'm looking at Google prompting courses and things like that, right? When you're ingesting all kinds of different traffic sources, thinking about experiments, like what's like the prompt engineering 101 that you're doing to make sure you're still on track to drive a good outcome and the model isn't getting overwhelmed by all this noise?
Yeah, I mean, we did that early on in our director of engineering, Adam, amazing guy, brilliant mind. He spent more time than he thought he would have, to do that. But that was a big, I wish I could speak on it specifically, that was, one of those battles is, the noise, is that impacting the outcome? Is that, are these false positives, that we're looking at? So we had to do a lot of data validation during that time and data matching. And we had to kind of go through and do the manual process and really understand how is the AI interpreting this type of information.
Yeah.
And then make those adjustments. So it is unfortunately a manual process, but I think that's what makes it special. It's not like, hey, I can just I can export some stuff from GA4, throw it into chat, ask it some questions. It's nothing like that,
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because like for viewers that, don't necessarily understand the implications of like using an LLM, it'll hallucinate sometimes.
So hallucination is huge.
And if you don't have a manual component in there where it's like, if you're trying to like create your own ClickMint with like just using RAG from like multiple different sources, like it's not going to like turn the way you want. Like you have to be a little supervised in the learning process of those LLMs. You have to make sure it's tuned right. You have to make sure those prompts are iterated across the hundreds of experiments like you guys have ran. So I mean, that totally makes sense. What I'm curious about is like how you see things sort of changing in 2026. And I don't know how much you can speak to the roadmap and what you're planning to build. Like what sorts of things are your customers asking for? And like, what are you looking to build on top of the current version of ClickMint?
Yeah. It's also a great question. I think our customers primarily are looking for returns, right? Like within the confines of like their brand image, and understandable design cues and direction. They just really want to see, improved CVRs and ATC rates and all that stuff. We onboarded a brand recently that's a very well-known makeup brand, and they have a conversion rate of 15% on their site.
Wow.
It's astronomical.
That's ridiculous.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And I told the contact, hey, listen, you have a conversion rate that's significantly better than majority of people. Like you're like, up there. And he was like, yeah, but if you could tune my CVR to be, 22% higher, it will unlock me on TikTok. Like I'm spending so much in ad spend and I could double or triple. If you could reduce my customer acquisition cost, like that to me is the end all be all. And so I think for 2026, what we're looking into is addressing highly specific traffic oriented questions like that, really digging deeper into reducing CAC costs per traffic in marketplace. Traffic. Sorry, repetitive.
So let's dive into that a bit more, because I think, especially with TikTok Shop and TikTok, like this is a very pertinent topic for me. I think a lot of people are looking at TikTok Shop as like a cost-effective marketing / customer acquisition channel, right? Where it's like you can get brand awareness and still acquire some customers. Granted, to your point, the CAC is a lot higher on there versus probably like a Meta ads, right? But then marketers are still kind of looking at it as like a sum blended average between all their channels, right? Why are you focusing on optimizing the CAC for one channel? Have you thought about like more of like an omni channel, like blended? Okay, got it.
It is omni channel. So
Okay,
again, in our diagnostic is we're able to look at direct traffic, sourced from any area online. I'm just using TikTok as one example. So it's definitely an omni-channel approach. But I think there are a lot of blockers to people who are finding success on TikTok or Meta. They really can't unlock. They need their CAC to be lower. And so for us, understanding that going into relationship is more important than, hey, we just want to improve your conversion rate. So it's becoming more surgical and more prescriptive, so they can make tweaks on their back end to like 2x or 3x volume.
Okay, so talk to me about like the discovery process around CAC. Like I know CAC is customer acquisition cost, right? Super important. CAC to LTV is like the general equation, right? How much does it cost for me to acquire a customer, and how much is that customer worth? And then you're playing middleman, where it's like we can help you acquire that customer for cheaper, right? So when you're diving in and diagnosing CAC, are you looking at just CAC to LTV? Like, what do these conversations look like with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. CAC to LTV. That's the cool thing about our technology and leveraging the type of data inputs that we have is we see all of the behavioral tracking downstream. So we see everything going on from that particular type of client, customer. It's not like, hey, did they buy? A lot of for those who are unaware of how, traditional A/B testing platforms work, it's really superficial in that, if somebody sees a page and they check out, you see a conversion fire. It's as simple as that. But we have revenue intelligence downstream that gives a better understanding of what did they do after the purchase, or when they came back, what ultimately is the LTV of this particular customer. What are they buying? What are they interested in? So we create personas that are pretty in depth. CAC is part of it, right? But LTV, product cycles, product purchase, history, that's all kind of blended into it. And for us, we're able to take action on that in the future. So I think That's really what we're looking at. It's not necessarily just providing a fancy dashboard with more data than this brand has ever seen on conversion rate optimization, but it's preparing them for, okay, let's talk about what you're going to expect next month based on this behavior.
Yeah, because I think like to your point, right? They're all interrelated. I mean, I'm curious just to dive a little bit deeper. Like, how much are you diving into like their CAC decision making process? Because I think sometimes companies are at stages where it's like, I don't care if I spend more than the initial purchase value to acquire this customer because the LTV is higher. Like, are you guys feeding in inputs, using RAG back into your model where it's like, hey, male customers have like a 2.3 times higher LTV. So we're going to optimize our pages for those things. Like what does it actually look like in the weeds, with some of these customers there?
Yeah. And it's an interesting question because it's one that we're working on at the moment. I said, 2026 is kind of a big year for this exact portion of the business. And it gets tense at moments because they have paid media teams, when their goal is to do exactly what you're talking about is, hey, we're going to run more traffic and we're performance marketers. You guys are just landing page people. Get out of our hair, So
Interesting.
So we're trying to figure out how to work with these teams in a more fluid way. And it's challenging, no doubt. Because when we request data, like you mentioned, sometimes, they'll be like, wow, they're encroaching on our territory. Are you guys going to try to take our job? And the short answer is no. The more information and learnings we can feed our model, the better our outputs are going to be. And the lower your CAC cost is. You guys are probably billing a % of spend. You'll be able to double or triple spend, but they're not hearing that, in many scenarios. So it's a delicate dance right now. It really is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cause my hunch is that focusing too much on the CVR doesn't actually look high enough at the business goals sometimes. Right. Cause if I lower my CVR, but my revenue share of customers is 3 times valuable, right? If I lower it by a couple percentage, but now more of my customers are more valuable, then don't I make more money in the long run? And then doesn't it make sense for me to then run more ads oriented to that? Doesn't the colors of the website, like the design, the fonts, that all should kind of be tailored in that direction, right? Do you have do you ever with your clients be like, hey, this isn't the goal, or you need to look at something beyond conversion rate optimization? I know it's weird because you guys are a CRO solution, but do you ever validate success beyond conversion rate?
Yeah, I think that there are micro conversions that we do our best to provide and explain to brands. And it's similar to, pulling a page in a history with Advertise Purple. At the end of the day, they just want sales, So at Advertise Purple, we're very vocal about the types of affiliates and the diverse portfolio that we're onboarding. Yeah, that's nice. So how much did they sell? So I think that we know what we're being hired to do. But we have, again, all of this downstream tracking and this revenue intelligence that we're able to provide to them and highlight ancillary value points and be like, if you would like us to dig deeper into this, more than happy to. Great example is, different types of product pairing and product selling. And, they have, for the most part, most brands, they're top sellers.
Yeah.
So the question is, well, how do we leverage your bottom 5,000 SKUs? Is there a world where we could sell more of those products? And so that isn't a battle, but it's definitely an interesting point that we're able to raise with a brand and have them say, I could care less about these. Or you know what? There's a major pet brand that we're working with, and that is their strategy is, leveraging the underutilized SKUs. They have the inventory. These don't sell. They don't get traffic from socials or from paid anywhere, but they're great products and they just need to create a shopping environment where they get more eyeballs. So, long answer to your question, but yeah, there are brands that are more interested in what else can we do? I get it that sales are important, no doubt, but I don't want to keep pushing on the steel mugs that, already crush it. What about the black mugs or the candles?
Yeah. That's interesting because it makes me think more about the scope and brings me back to the paid media battle where it's just Now it almost sounds like social listening is important, where it's like, because in marketplaces, for example, as you know, right, if we launch new SKUs, we get a certain amount of arbitrage on traffic. And like a lot of people are just trying to launch new products as a scaling strategy, right? But for D2C, with conversion rate optimization, like, is there a world where you're hooking that up into a Sprout Social, where you're analyzing the increase in traffics on Instagram and TikTok for certain keywords, where now their tertiary or, you know, fourth SKU or fifth SKU actually should be optimized for a different landing page, and there's arbitrage there, you know? Like, I think
I mean, you are explaining kind of the vision that we have and the thoughts that float around in our minds. There's so much that you can do, right? It's endless, because like you said, it's all interconnected. And so there's, you know, this massive repository of data that we're now starting to get clarity on and that we're building upon, and all the internal wins and losses with these experiments, hundreds and, you know, thousands of experiments that we're deploying, gives us more insight into the possibility of doing what you mentioned. And so I think is a founder in probably at Reach, or you guys are experiencing this, it's like, when do you draw the line? You know what I mean? Like,
oh my God,
it's a shiny penny every day. You're like, and we could do that, and we could do that.
Yeah, that's a battle I have with Jerry and Bora. And like, they're always like, oh, like as a founder, we should be doing more moonshots and reaching wide. I'm like, yeah, but if you're also not opinionated and specific, your moonshots become less important or significant in the grand scheme of the market, you know? So it's a whole other discussion. I am curious, you know, as we're sort of winding down here, is there one thing or one question you wish I would have asked or you wanted to share about ClickMint?
I don't believe so. I think you nailed pretty much all of it. And I think, you know, our discussion was pretty comprehensive in terms of scope. Again, it's a really dense subject matter, right? It's kind of CRO is something that people know about, and, you know, directors at e-com brands understand, but in terms of executing properly, I think that's the challenge. You know, and as these marketplaces begin to become more impacted, more expensive, I think the whole concept of, you know, improving the D2C experience, retaining more margin, higher LTVs, controlling your destiny a bit more on your site, those will kind of make their way into I think more and more conversations.
And I think one thing that the viewers may not know is you're also a previous, like, you have some tech bones and previous ad tech founders with like Purpley, Mosaic Digital, and, you know, helping with the genesis of Bloom, which is Advertise Purple's in-house technology, right? And then now you scaled the agency to 170 plus employees, brought in a lot of revenue, and then you're building another SaaS, right? Like, you have this streak of like really great entrepreneurship. For a lot of the tech founders and GTM leaders listening, is there any advice you'd give them that you wish you would have told yourself maybe 10, 15 years ago?
Oh gosh. I think you kind of stick with your convictions and you go with your gut. You know, the tech is a noisy space. There's a lot of stuff. And we talked about this in Malibu. You know, if you spend most of your day looking to the right and left, looking at the competitors and being, oh, well, they just added this. Let's pause and add that, you know, let's feature fatigue this platform because other people are doing that. It must be the right thing to do. That's a scary proposition. And I understand that, you know, overanalyzing competitors is, you know, there's literature from like YC that's important. Like you need to do that, you know, but again, my personal experience is that, you know, understand your client, build something that solves a problem for them and provides utility for them. And so I think, in short, the answer to your question is better understanding your client. It all comes down to that. You can get lost in technology and things that are cool, but completely unnecessary. And the biggest casualty of that is time. You know, you're worried about competitors. Time is, you know, so spending more time speaking directly with your brands, helping them find success, and then leveraging those learnings for future growth, I think is crucial.
Awesome. Well, that's really great advice, and really appreciate you making the time to jump on here.
Yeah.